she does that, she drops a $100 bill on the floor. And she doesn't see it, but you see it, right? The person between you and the woman who was checking out doesn't seem to notice it either. So, the wheels start turning. Whoa, there's a $100 bill laying right there. Hope that $100 bill's still laying there when it's my turn to check out. That would be really cool. Come to the grocery store and make $100. That's the evil twin. That's how I break them down. The evil twin and the good twin. We all have them in us. The good twin goes, what, are you kidding me? That's her money. Tell the lady that's her money. Call it to her attention. Give her her money back. The bad twin goes, are you stupid? You could use that $100. If she's stupid enough to be yanking $100 bills out of her pocket and not even know when they fall to the ground, she deserves to lose that $100 bill. I deserve to pick it up. Why not? I mean, why shouldn't I? She's the careless one. She obviously must have, we can justify anything, right? She obviously must have all the money in the world because she's got too many $100 bills in her pocket. It's laying there, she doesn't even know it. She doesn't care about it. That $100 bill will go a long way with me. Baby needs new shoes, got that tuition to start paying, got some bills. That $100 is going to help me. The good twin goes, except it isn't your money. There's a small problem here. It's not yours. If you want to be a good person, an ethical person, a fair-minded person, and you want to treat other people the way you want to be treated in this situation, then you know what the answer is. You know what to do. It is to tap her on the shoulder and tell her she dropped that $100 bill. So we do this. We get into these little situations day in and day out where, as I call them, the good twins on one shoulder, the bad twins on the other shoulder, and they're slugging it out. And here's where reason and free will comes into play. Our reason can tell us, come on, you know what the right thing to do is. And our free will says, yeah, but I ain't doing it. Right? I'm going to take the expedient path. I'm going to do what's good for me. For once in my life, I, who sacrifice for everybody, right? I'm always helping other people. So I'm going to be the one who benefits from this fortuitous accident on the part of this woman. You can see where, again, that just kind of, informs our lives. But I said that the free will was the big mistake because that's where we get into trouble. We talk ourselves into doing bad things or talk ourselves into believing that doing the wrong thing is okay. And, you could all, if we're all honest with ourselves, we know we've all been in that situation. Hopefully, most of us have chosen the right thing to do, and the good twin has prevailed. But it doesn't always, and therein lies, as I said, a big fat part of the problem. So, fast forward to, now we're into the part that really is in your textbook. So we'll cover these two guys and then we'll shut it down and do the test and the quiz. So, a guy named John Stuart Mill, whose name should be familiar to you if you studied U.S. history. And another British philosopher. Mill was a British philosopher. He did a lot of political type writings. He wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. Yeah. Anyway, John Stuart Mill did had a lot of input really into the concepts that ended up manifesting themselves in the Declaration of Independence here. He was a big believer in, that's what he wrote. He wrote a pamphlet called On Liberty, meaning about liberty. And he talked a lot about, in the kind of government that we ended up having, a representative democracy, how the majority has to not overpower the minority. In other words, the majority rules, but it needs to rule in a compassionate way that takes into account the rights of the minorities who are not in power at any given time. because they are human beings too. And to be a decent and civilized society, the majority does not need to run roughshod over the rights of the minority. So his theories emphasize this individual liberty in the context of majority rule, but the need for compassion. So these two guys, who also were not contemporaries, together put together a little, or their writings taken together rather, are the basis for the ethical system known as utilitarianism. So the utilitarians say, by its name, you can see that it aspires to be a very practical system of morality or ethical beliefs. The notion here is that actions should be judged as being moral or immoral based upon the consequences those actions produce. So utilitarianism, and this will be on your next test, I promise, is a system of ethics that is outcome-based. What it says is, if you're trying to choose between two paths of conduct, whatever your decision might center around, you can either go down path A or path B. If you're trying to decide between the two of them, and you are motivated to make the most ethical decisions, then the way to do that is to sort of get out your crystal ball, project down the road. If I follow path A, what is the likely outcome going to be? What are the consequences of taking path A? Where am I going to end up if I choose path A? And you do the same thing for path B. Then the utilitarians say, and this is kind of the genius of utilitarianism because it's extremely appealing because it's kind of practically based. They say, when you have done that, when you have tried to gauge the outcome of both choices that you are confronting, whichever one produces the greatest good or greatest benefit for the greatest number is the more ethical choice. So whichever path you choose, A or B, which one is going to produce the biggest benefit for the biggest number of people? And that's the moral one. That's the ethical one. So it has some appeal because it really kind of talks about trying to quantify, right? You're trying to figure out what are the consequences, and you're measuring the benefits that each one would produce, and also the negative effects that each one would produce. And whichever path produces the greatest amount of benefit, the greatest good, for the greatest number of people, the utilitarians say that's where to go. That's the ethical choice. Now, there are some problems with that because not everything can be reduced to numbers. Not everything can be quantified. It also, as I said, requires you to project into the future or down the road. But this whole concept is alive and well in the business world today in the form of what we call cost-benefit analysis, right? So cost-benefit analysis means, let's say Walmart is trying to decide whether or not to close a particular store of theirs. So cost-benefit analysis would say, what are the costs of closing this store, and what are the benefits likely to be if we close this store? One of the benefits is probably going to be a benefit to the shareholders, right? Because it will improve the bottom line. The only reason Walmart talks about closing stores is if the store is losing money, and they can figure out another way to make more money instead of losing money. So they do that cost-benefit analysis and attempt to determine, based on that, are we going to keep this store open or are we going to close the store? So the utilitarians, as I said, utilitarianism has a lot of appeal in today's world, because it's a very sort of practical solution to this issue of moral choices and ethical choices. But sometimes the answer you get may require actions that some people find intolerable. And sometimes the greatest good for the greatest number means that you have to let, one boatload of people drown because you can't rescue both. So if this boat's got 500 people on it and this boat's got 200 people on it and you really can only rescue one, if this is what you're doing to try to decide, how do I decide which boat I'm going to rescue? Do I look and see, does the boat with 200 people have a lot of kids on it? Kids who have not lived their lives yet and perhaps who deserve to live? And maybe I should go there. Or is it the boat with 500 people on it? Well, the utilitarians would say, easy peasy, right? You go with the 500 people. The greatest benefit or the greatest number. If you can save 500, then your choice is obvious. Let the boat with 200 people on it capsize and let those folks drown if you cannot save both of them. So again, sometimes the choices you would make going through this exercise, or the choices that this exercise would point you towards and say, this is the choice, this is the ethical choice, may not be particularly palatable or tolerable for us, depending on the nature of the situation. Now compare that to the other, and as I said, this is still a major factor or a major basis for ethical concepts in business. So compare that outcome-based ethics or utilitarianism to another set of ethics referred to as duty-based ethics. Duty-based ethics was the brainchild of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So here's what Kant says, and you're going to see some of what Kant talked about really kind of harkens back to some extent to the natural law philosophers as well. So here's what Kant says. Kant says, look, you can't make a person behave morally or ethically if you're trying to impose that obligation on them from the outside. And you cannot have a truly moral society simply by setting it up and forcing people to be moral. In other words, you're not going to get a truly moral human being or a truly moral society if the only reason people are following a moral or ethical path is so that they don't get into trouble. They don't want to bear the punishment that might result from being unethical, so they toe the line. In the Catholic Church when I was a kid, that was, you do this or you burn in hell, right? So when you're like, 8 years old and people talking to you about burning in hell for all eternity, you go, oh yeah, I ain't doing that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be there, right? No, okay, I'm scared of that punishment. I'm going to do the right thing because I don't want to go burn in hell for all eternity. So he says, yeah, that's not going to make, that kind of system doesn't make a really moral society. He says the only way you have truly moral human beings and a truly moral society is if we all make that choice internally for ourselves. So his thought is each individual has to develop his own sense of morality, his own sense of what is ethical and what is right. It can't be imposed by rules from the outside. So his idea was, he really rejected this concept of trying to decide between alternate courses of action as being which one is more ethical based on the consequences or the results of following each path. He said that has nothing to do with it. You don't have to predict the future. That's not the issue. Your sense of what is right and wrong will come from your developing this sense of your duty from within, what is your duty as a human being, as a member of human society? And if it is to work in such a way as to benefit all of society, then you're on the right track, because that's a personal sense of duty, that's your personal mission, and you're much more likely to keep to it, to practice, to live that way, if you're doing it because you're freely choosing to do it, rather than because you're afraid of bad consequences if you don't live that way. So he talked about he had these two really big concepts. I'm going to tell you, the one I'm getting ready to write on the board, I disagree with your textbook, okay? So here's the point. Your textbook confuses two of Kant's more important concepts. Your textbook confuses the categorical imperative with Kant's universalization principle. So here's how the categorical imperative actually works. And believe me, I am no philosopher. I've not studied this stuff in great detail, haven't even taken a course for 30 years. But the categorical imperative means this. First of all, what's the adjective categorical mean? If I say, we typically have heard that expression, or you may have heard it as, oh, he is a categorical liar. What does that mean, categorical? Doesn't mean he lies in categories.
High stature, like.
Say what?
High stature, like a very, like a big liar.
You're getting there. That's close. Basically means he lies all the time. So categorical means absolute. He's an absolute 100%, 24/7, day in and day out liar. Okay, something like that. So categorical simply means absolute. I only brought the liar part up because that's a typical phrase where you're more likely to have heard the use of the word categorical. What's an imperative? Think back to your English grammar. What's an imperative sentence? A command, right. It's sit down, shut up, eat your dinner, go to bed, stop bugging me, right? Orders or commands. So the categorical imperative is what Kant says will result from your being introspective, going inside yourself and trying to determine what is your duty to yourself and to society in order to make this a more moral and ethical and fair place. So I use the analogy of the good twin, bad twin. He did not, obviously, but I can explain it in that context. He says when you go inside of yourself, when you're faced with an ethical dilemma and you're trying really honestly to determine which course of action you should take, you've got two choices. Which is the more ethical or moral? He says, when you go inside yourself and you hear that little voice, I call it a conscience. He did not. Freud came along after Kant, and all of that conscience and ego and all of that stuff came about really crystallized from Freud. But what Kant is talking about is kind of like a conscience. He says you hear that little voice inside of you, and when you hear that little voice say the word should or the word ought, this is what you ought to do. This is what you should do. That's the absolute statement. It's an absolute command. He said, so basically, don't give me all this BS about how you can't figure out what the more ethical choice is. Because if you go inside yourself and you're being honest with yourself, you're going to hear a voice that says, you know what the right thing to do is. You know that this is what you should do because this choice is the right choice. So once you hear that little voice giving you this absolute command, this is the right thing to do, this is what you should do, there's your categorical imperative. It's a command and it's absolute. It's not equivocal. It's not, well, maybe this is the right thing to do, but then let's hear from the evil twin. Let's hear from the other side. So what do you think I should do, right? He says, so, you're playing games with your own mind. Hold your question for me. Playing games with your, with your own head. This is, you know what the answer is. Then he says, and if you really want to still pretend you don't know what the answer is after you go through this exercise, then I got another rule for you that's easy to apply, called the universalization principle. Again, your textbook defines what is really the categorical imperative in terms of the universalization principle. But that's like, universalization principle is a bit separate. He says, ask yourself when you're faced with an ethical dilemma, ask yourself if the choice that you are about to make, if you would be willing for everyone in the world who is confronted by this same dilemma, make the same choice you're about to make. Would you like to see that decision be universal? So think about stuff like, you're a fourth-year med student, right? You've busted it for years and years and years. You go into your final examination in your last course of your 4 years in med school. You're hoping for this bright future. You got an internship set up. You want to get a good residency placement. You've done well. You're not the top of your class, but you've done well. Lo and behold, as it happens, you're so exhausted, you fall asleep at like 11 o'clock the night before your last exam, which means you didn't really get to study. Then, as it turns out, your professor says, I'm going to leave you all on your honor. I'm not going to proctor this exam. No one will be in here watching you. You're on your honor. So, you think, wow, I don't know this crap because I fell asleep, right? I don't want to like blow my last exam. My grades are okay, but I mean, if I pull an F in this class, I may not end up graduating. So, what harm would there be? I can sit in here, have my computer, all my notes are on my computer. The teacher said he's not paying attention to us. We're on our own. So what's the harm in my cheating? Because if I cheat, I'm assured of passing. And then I can go on to do great things. And who knows, maybe I'll be the one who finds the ultimate cure for cancer. Right? So do I cheat or don't I cheat? Kant says, ask yourself, med student, do I want every med student who is faced with this dilemma to decide to cheat? So that every doctor in the world ends up being somebody who cheated his way through a final exam? Oh, probably not. I don't want those fools operating on me, right? So that's the basic concept. Just ask yourself, is this an acceptable choice universally? Would you be happy with everybody selecting the choice that you're about to select? If the answer is no, again, Kant says, then you got your answer. It's no, then don't do that one. That's the wrong one. And that's basically his philosophy. So he also talked about the fact that blind, unquestioning obedience to authority is not a moral choice. Again, if you're only succumbing to authority and doing, quote unquote, the right thing because you're afraid of bad consequences if you don't, that's not a moral choice. A moral choice has to come from your own personal sense, your own individual sense of what is right. And there you have it. All right, so, and he also taught one last thing, that people can never be a means to an end, that people always have to be the end. What he means by that is people have to be the goal, that the improvement of other people's lives is really the right way to approach solving problems and not using people to achieve some other goal like making money. Okay, so that's also an important lesson. So this very individualistic approach to morality, and again, don't look at the consequences to determine which of the two is the best choice. Look at it from what is the right choice for me to basically know that I am personally and individually doing the right thing. Okay, I'm sorry.